Disclaimer: information in this episode is not nor is intended to be legal advice. Contact an attorney to obtain advice regarding your individual needs.
Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever or whoever you may be. I am Alan Arante, and this is the Recluse Podcast. Today's guest is Caitlin Rodriquez. She is a lawyer based in Ventura, California. She practices family law and estate planning. That would include things like divorce, child support, wills, and property transfers. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in history from Cal State Channel Islands, and she went on to Western School of Law in San Diego. In this conversation, we talk about her law school experience and what it was like to take the bar exam. Caitlin reflects on her internship with the Public Defender's Office in San Diego. She considers whether or not a lawyer can ever take off the lawyer cap, a reality described by Anita Hill. Hill says, "One of the things I was taught in law school is that I'd never be able to think the same again, that being a lawyer is something that's a part of who I am as an individual now." And that seemed to be a feeling that Caitlin has. She talks about how she makes an effort to separate her personal and professional life, but that the two often blend together. Caitlin Rodriquez, attorney at law, can be found on Instagram at 805 Law Practice, and she can be reached through her website at 805lawpractice.com. So without further delay, this is a portrait of Caitlin Rodriquez. Do you separate your personal life from your profession, or are you just always in lawyer mode?
I try my best to separate, but it's really hard. I mean, as far as that quote goes, I would say that it is true. And honestly, for me personally, it tends to come up in kind of, I guess I would say annoying ways where, for example, you could just be having a conversation with someone at the dog park and they tell you something about, oh yeah, my neighbor, their dog bit me, and my mind automatically goes into like, is this the first time the dog has bitten someone? Is this, and same things with like television shows, like, if there's a courtroom scene, it's like, oh my God, that's totally unrealistic because I know what is supposed to be going on. So I guess in ways it does surface in my own life, and it, I would say sometimes it's kind of annoying because it is difficult to completely just shut off the lawyer mind. So my dad had told me right before starting law school that law school basically all it's doing is teaching you how to think like a lawyer. And then that permeates into your everyday life. So I think he was correct in that.
And you were saying something about how you try to separate your personal life from your professional life, and how that doesn't always work because obviously you're a person, and these areas in our lives, they blend together. And it makes me think of, say, a doctor, for example, when they have to give a patient bad news or tell them some diagnosis, and they seem very removed from the situation, and they are just there to relay the information. Is that sort of how you feel as a lawyer when you're in certain situations in your professional life? Are you able to distance yourselves from the content of your work?
I think I am, but I also think that it's important to not completely distance yourself. I think in ways you need to protect yourself emotionally and not get too emotionally involved. But but I also think it's important to show your clients that you do care and not to completely separate. And I think that's sometimes, people don't like lawyers or doctors in the example you give for that reason, that you need to have a good bedside manner. And I think, I think that since I have been practicing, that's something that I can tell my clients appreciate about me. Where I've noticed interactions with other attorneys, sometimes it's very, like you said, just like, here's the information done, where, they call lawyers counselors because I think part of it is just, being an ear for them, to have someone to talk to and, confide in about stuff. And you can, a lot of times, advice is just regular advice that it's not necessarily legal all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. For example, in the education field, I forget what they call it, but it's something like the untaught curriculum. So teachers, for example, why a lot of teachers go into education is they want to make a difference in kids' lives. They want to be a good role model. They want to be an advocate. And interestingly enough, that stuff isn't taught in the program. We learn about the curriculum. We learn about just all these various things. So when you went through your law degree, was there some hidden curriculum there that they didn't teach you? I mean, are you learning on the job how to console and how to be a counselor? Because you said some lawyers are just cold and just relay the information. That's it. Is that bedside manner and that rapport that you have to build with a client, is that something you learn on your own as a lawyer as opposed to in the program?
I would say it's more something that you learn on your own. And I think that also it's something that you just learn in the workforce in general. I think, I went to law school a little bit later than is the typical law student. A lot of people go in straight into law school from undergrad, and some of those people have never had a job before. And so it's almost like they've never even learned how to interact with people, in any sort of like professional manner. So I think I think it's just something that you learn, like from working and working specifically as an attorney. Prior to law, it's kind of random, but I actually was in the veterinary field for 10 plus years. And that, for me, I think that's where I learned how to deal with that, because initially when I started in the field, I was really young. And, when we'd have a super sick animal or we had to euthanize an animal, I would get so upset by it. And then I was like, okay, I can't do that. I have to be able to be professional. So I completely cut my emotions off. And then eventually I was able to find this happy balance, because, you walk into a room with clients who are crying because their animal is really sick, and you want to show that you care. And I know that's a completely different field, but I feel like that's where I learned how to interact with clients that way.
And in terms of being a lawyer, you're the professional in the room with the client. And actually, just in general, now that I think about it, what personality traits and characteristics do you think are really essential for a lawyer to be effective and good? I mean, is it straightforwardness, responsibility? What are some of the adjectives you would use that a lawyer should be described as to be good?
I would say that they need to have tenacity. I think that they need to have their ducks in a row as far as being on top of things. I think that they need to have like a I think that they need to show that they're human as well, because I think that adds value in your ability to be an attorney, like we were just talking about. And then, yeah, I think I would say it's easier to have kind of the type A personality, because I mean, I've come across attorneys who are not, and they're just all over the place, and you can tell the clients get frustrated and, and all that stuff. And the attorneys, in my experience, that seem to be more successful with client relations, at least, are, ones who kind of have that, like, they're organized and they're on top of it.
So you had, I read on your website that you had some interning experience. You worked with San Diego County Alternate Public Defender's Office. What did you do there, and what did you actually, so what did you do there, and at what time was this? Were you in law school at that time, or was this post-law school?
Yes, so this was during law school, and it was actually the summer, I think it was summer 2017. I had done a study abroad in Chile, and so I came back and started this internship a little later than some of the other interns. And so my time was shorter there, and I basically got to witness one trial from beginning to end. And basically, I was just helping my supervising attorney write different motions. And, honestly, I went into law school wanting to be a public defender. I thought that I wanted to get into criminal law. And this experience, I already knew I would end up getting too emotionally involved, and that I would end up getting upset by it, because the one trial that we did was kind of upsetting, and just seeing the dynamics of how it works, behind the scenes, that I remember my supervising attorney talking about how the district attorneys, they are expected to win a case no matter what. And if they lose, and this, I know this is kind of common in all areas, but I know specifically San Diego County is like this, that he said they'll literally, if you lose a case, the entire office has a meeting to discuss, like, well, what happened? Why did we lose this case? And why, and, they just have a lot more resources than the public defender's office. And I don't know, I just don't like that. I don't think that district attorneys, like, go into that field because they're bad people. I think that they go into it wanting to get criminals off the street, and, people who actually deserve to, be punished for certain things that they do.
Right.
But I think that once you get into it, you realize that, like, oh, my boss is expecting me to win this case, and you have to do it no matter what, no matter what your personal beliefs are. So I don't know. I didn't really like the dynamic of, interacting with the DAs, and I mean, these people's lives are in your hand, and, I don't know, like,
It's incredibly consequential, the way you're making it sound. If you're witnessing this case unfold and you're being supervised by this attorney above you, I feel like every pen stroke the guy made is consequential, and that's just so much weight. I can't even fathom it.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was a public defender for Ventura County, and he had issues with that. He ended up retiring early because he was so you know, so emotionally invested in his clients that it was difficult for him to separate. And, you know, so I commend people who are able to do it and remain emotionally healthy human beings.
Wow. So your father was a lawyer. That's interesting. When did you realize that you wanted to go into law? Did your father's experience and career put that little, feather in your cap where you thought, hey, maybe I could do it too? So when did you decide to pursue law, and what influenced that choice?
So my whole life, my dad was an attorney, and even when he retired from the public defender's office, he did private practice, and he was always, he was kind of like the activist attorney. He went and, helped in the legal tent, at the pipeline, when the protesters were at the pipeline, and then relatively recently when there was the big, amount of people coming up to the border, he went down there to help at the border. And, and he kind of did stuff like that, my whole life. So it was kind of, like, wow, like I want to be, kind of an activist like that too. And it was, when I was in college, I considered going to law school, because I knew it would be a way to, help people. And that was my main thing that I wanted to do, was help people and be able to make a comfortable living while I was helping people in important ways, So I would say it was probably about my undergrad. I kind of considered it, but then I ended up just working for a while. And when that kind of got, I was like, I need to do more. Like, I'm not doing those things that I wanted to do. So I'm going to go back to law school. So that's what I did.
What did your dad say when you said, hey, Dad, I'm thinking of going to law school? What did he have to say about that?
He was excited, I think, he was excited, and he didn't give me any of the warnings that I should have received prior to law school. But yeah, I think he was excited, and he was, proud that that was something that I wanted to pursue. And, throughout law school, I talked to my dad every single day, like not even an exaggeration. Like we talked every single day because it was, he was kind of that support during my law school, career. And I think also he liked to do, I think he liked to kind of be the one to like give me advice and, maybe reliving his time as a law student a little bit. So, yeah.
In law school, is there like a program system where, I'm going to go into a criminal law program? Or is there just like a blanket structure for everybody and then you pick after you graduate?
So they have, at least at my school, they have a set of classes that you have to take. And it takes the first year. And then I think some in the second year as well. But then from there, so those include things like, criminal law, civil procedure, there's a legal writing class, things like that. And then afterwards, and they call those the bar required courses.
Oh, okay.
And then after that, they have bar recommended courses that you can take kind of once you're able to start choosing what classes you want to take.
And what from your experience or from the experience of everybody around you at school as well, what was the most difficult area to study? Was there some notoriously difficult subject? I don't know, constitutional law, I don't know what. Or was it really just, it just depended on your personality, what was difficult and what was easy?
I think that I can't think of like a notoriously difficult class. I think a lot of times it has to do with maybe the professor as well. For me, an example of a really difficult class was evidence. And part of that was the professor. And then another really difficult class was criminal procedure. So that's things like, search and seizure and things like that. Not necessarily, criminal laws, but how like cops are able to interact with people and, things like that. And that class was pretty difficult just because there's the structure of the way a lot of these classes goes is that they teach you how it started. And then, so you're learning all these laws and then it's like, but today this is how it is. So it's hard to kind of like keep on top of like, but they'll test you on everything and the testing is pretty difficult as well because it's your only grade is the final. So.
Yeah, it sounds like just a I mean, I'm sure it's complex and difficult to understand at times too, but it sounds like a quantity problem. There's just so much to know.
I think, like you said, definitely there were things that, conceptually were a little difficult to understand, but the amount of information and that was one of the things that was so different from undergrad was that, in undergrad you have papers and a midterm and a final and different projects throughout the year that are graded where you're studying one subject the whole semester and then you're having to remember all of that for one test that counts for your entire grade. So, yeah.
So during your, you might have taken this in undergraduate, and I believe you were a history major, right? You got a history degree?
Yes.
So not counting undergrad, does law school provide or require any philosophy or logic courses?
No. I mean, I would say the logic is kind of just woven into each subject area, but the way that they go back in the history of the law kind of, so I guess that is, the philosophy side of it, I guess, because it'll say like, this is how, for example, in real property class, they go and talk about how you had to like put a spear in a whale when you were whale hunting, and that was how you claimed it to be your property. Like, obviously that's not relevant nowadays, really. I mean, it is in some ways, I guess, but we're learning these like old cases that, yeah.
Do you consider yourself sort of an egghead in the sense that you value the foundations of the law you practice? Or, is it just, do you not really care about, what Socrates said? You just practice law as it is today?
I think it's interesting to me because I am interested in history. But I wouldn't say that it's like, I'm going to go back and to give an example to a client that I'm going to go back and like quote Socrates or something. You know what I mean? But yeah, it is interesting to me, the history of things, because sometimes it's really silly stuff that, like the whale thing, for example. So I think it's kind of fun to study that part about it. And, and I do think that things, history, I think, is really important, because if we don't know history, then we might make the same mistakes that we made in the past. And, we all know that a lot of bad things have happened in the past. And so, I think that, yes, it is important to know the history of things in general.
So you were you've described a couple things from the program you were in and just law school in general. I was looking, I was just curious about the bar exam. I've had a couple friends take it, and, pop culture tells us how hard and difficult it is. So I was curious if you could just simply, you obviously you don't have to go into detail, but can you just tell us a little about the content areas that are on the bar exam, just what some of them are, and what is the exam structure like? What are you actually having to do on the exam?
Okay, so the areas of law that you could potentially be tested on is business association, civil procedure, evidence, professional responsibility, property, torts, wills and trusts, constitutional law. In California, you have to know community property. So it's kind of, a bunch of different areas that you need to know. And that was one of the things, when I was in school, I even took the bar recommended courses, because I didn't want to go into studying for the bar never having any sort of, basic foundation of an area, because for example, I'm trying to think of, like wills and trusts wasn't a required course in school, but I took it because I knew that it was going to be tested on the bar exam. So there were some people that I studied with that was their first time studying, and, that topic, and I didn't want to be in that position.
A witness sees a murder in the park and is called to testify in the criminal case. Can the defense attorney ask her on cross-examination about her habit of feeding the pigeons? The defense knows that she was cited several times for illegally feeding the pigeons. Defense counsel tries to ask, "You have a long-time habit of feeding the pigeons, don't you? You have, in fact, been ticketed several times for feeding pigeons, haven't you? And yet you persisted in doing it. Isn't that so?" Will the trial court likely allow the witness to be questioned on these matters? So what's your reaction to that? What are you thinking about with a problem like that?
So my immediate thought is, this is a criminal and or evidence question. So that if I was, taking the test, the first thing I do is identify the area that it is trying to test on. So for me, a witness sees a murder, okay, criminal law, called to testify, okay, so there's probably going to be evidence. And then when you get to the, last question of, will the trial court likely allow the witness to continue to be questioned on these matters, that to me is like, okay, it's an evidence question. They're, they're asking, can the defense counsel even do this? So, and if I was taking this, I would be like underlining and highlighting and, certain facts that I think are pertinent to answering this question.
What would the advantage be for the defense to even question along that line, to question this witness along those lines of her, I guess perhaps, I don't know what you would call it, criminal history. I mean, what's the advantage to getting an answer to those questions the defense was asking?
It could be to call into question her character. That's a lot of times that's what the opposing counsel in any situation is trying to do when they have a witness on the stand. They want to show, well, like, this person illegally feeds pigeons, so they might be a bad person. It's kind of a silly example because, feeding pigeons, even though it's maybe illegal, most people might not think of it as being like this horrendous act or anything.
So I guess I don't have the answer. What would you say? Will the trial court likely allow the witness to be questioned on these matters? What do you think?
So one of the basic foundations to getting any evidence in is relevance. And while I guess it could be argued that, like, if I was going to analyze this and I might analyze both sides to the argument, I would say, like, this doesn't seem relevant. She's feeding pigeons. How is her being cited for, feeding pigeons relevant? But then I guess, on the opposite side, you could say, like what we were just talking about, I guess, like they could make the argument that, well, it is relevant because if she's, not a good person or whatever, then she shouldn't be able to testify on this. And the other thought process I had as well is that maybe they're trying to argue that, she couldn't have fully witnessed the murder if she was distracted by feeding the pigeons.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was, who knows? I don't know what the answer to this is, but, that could potentially be another argument.
And see, what blows my mind about it is that, which I appreciate your interpretation and analysis and the process you just outlined. But what blows my mind is that you have to do that 200 times because the exam has 200 questions. And it's just, that's like I told you. I mean, God, I read 3 questions and I was already tired. I don't know how. I mean, God, it must be physically taxing and intellectually taxing to sit, in a hard chair for, I don't know, 6 hours, whatever it is, and run through that process 200 times. And you passed on the first time. What was your study regime like? I mean, how did you pass it the first time? How do you pass the bar exam?
It was a very difficult process. I did, I think the way that I studied in school helped prepare me for the discipline it took to, study for the bar exam. In school, I had a really strict schedule because and right away I was like, how am I going to be able to get all this stuff done? There's not enough time, to do this. So I created a schedule that was 6 days a week, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Wow.
And I had lunch, there was a lunch break in there, but that was my schedule, 6 days a week during school. So during the bar, studying for the bar, I took a study course that the school offered through a program called Barbary, and it was kind of like a class that you would go to, and they had study books and things like that, and so I would still get to, even though class didn't start until, I think it was 8, I would still get to the library at 7 and work on things. Then I would do the course, which was like an all day thing. And then I would come home and, make flashcards out of the lecture that we did that day. And And then it got to a point where it was just like all I was doing was practice tests and looking through my flashcards, just trying to memorize as much as I could. I mean, it was insane. I, cried regularly.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you must have had a bonfire with your notes at the end of that thing.
I didn't end up doing that, but I would joke about how I should, and then I just didn't end up doing it. I had this giant baggie full of flashcards, and it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous, but yeah, no, I did end up throwing stuff away, but I should have, lit it on fire and.
Do you have to continually study law, read books, and study the newest thing out? Or does the practice itself reinforce your law knowledge?
I would say that maybe both of those things are true. I think that definitely you have to keep up on the law, and usually you're only doing it for the practice areas that you practice. You're not expected to stay on top of all the changing laws. So a lot of times, like, for example, with estate planning, I have to keep up on the trusts and estate laws.
Wow.
So I actually get an email that, I'm on an email list that'll send us a, new case update. And so, there's ways to stay on top of it. And then, yeah, when you're actually practicing, you're still researching and, cause you don't know all the case laws. And then when it becomes, California specific and, so yeah, you do. And so, yeah, when you're practicing, it just kind of becomes part of your practice to do that.
Why? I don't know that you can answer this because it's probably one of those 8 wonders of the world kind of question. But what is up with legalese? So not only having to know everything, but having to understand, why is law so the opposite of straightforwardness? I feel like when you read something, there's multi-syllabic words that don't mean anything to the average person. Why is legal speak and legalese and just the text, why is it so difficult and complex?
My complete honest answer is job security. I think that, I mean, when I was in law school, they were talking about how there's this movement to plain English. And, our professors actually taught us how to write, in our legal writing class, for example, how to write in plain English. And, and when I told I think I was talking to my dad about it one time, and he was like, oh yeah, they've been saying that forever. So apparently since for a very long time, they've been talking about how we need to, access to justice. And one of the ways to provide access to justice is not having legalese. But wow. I think that, and I'm not 100% sure that that's what it is, but like, if I am to analyze the situation, I would say, because if it became a scenario where everyone could just understand the law and how to apply it to your factual scenario, then lawyers wouldn't be needed.
Oh, that's interesting. I really like that answer. So another maybe typical legal question, a pop legal question, maybe you could call it, is representing yourself a bad idea? Why or why not?
I would say yes, it is a bad idea because, I mean, if you are an attorney, I still think it's a bad idea because it's always better to have someone who is kind of an outside person looking at a fact, the facts of a case and be able to apply the law to it and make the particular arguments that need to be made when they don't have, that super deep personal connection to it. And then, if you're not an attorney, I definitely think it's a bad idea to represent yourself because of what we were just talking about, that, it's hard to, that's why people go to school and take the bar exam, because you can't just read something and know what the law says or, whatever. So yeah, I don't think it's ever a good idea to represent yourself.
Okay. I agree. If I were to represent myself, it's like, where do I start? Do I open my case and I start reading all the I don't, as an average person, as a layman, you don't understand the process. You don't understand the text. You don't understand the procedure. You don't know the nuances of the system. So you're just set up to fail. Another question, this probably is very simple, but what is admissible evidence?
So there is actually several requirements for evidence and different requirements depending on what type of evidence it is. But like what I had discussed earlier when we were talking about that sample bar question, the baseline for getting any evidence in is relevance. So, and then again, depending on what type of evidence, all of that, there's different things that you need to get past to be able to have evidence. And, for me, I'm just speaking on what I remember from studying evidence, because I haven't done anything where, I haven't done like a trial where I'm trying to get evidence in. Right. So in practice, but yes, so I can say the baseline is relevance.
I don't know. Is admissible evidence something that you do like in civil law too? Or is that more of like a staple of criminal law?
No, there's evidence that you do for civil law as well. I think that, and then there's different rules for that too. So, there's all kinds of, I would say it's kind of difficult to answer the harmful and helpful evidence aspect, because it depends on, and it depends is the lawyer answer, just so you're aware. If you ever ask a question to a lawyer, they will say it depends. And it's something that like you learn in law school, because if you go to ask a professor, they'll say, oh, well, it depends. And it kind of becomes this joke, because it really does depend, because you have to, depending on the facts and depending on the law and, all this stuff, there are all these factors that play into it that could change how you might respond to a question like that.
This question may sound offensive, and you must have read it already. So how can I say this? I don't mean it to be cutting when I ask this. So do lawyers, and I know you're not like a criminal lawyer, but do lawyers in a courtroom really believe what they are saying when they're defending their client, or are they merely spinning a yarn that adheres to the internal logic of their position. And I ask that because I've watched a few criminal cases where I'm like, my God, this lawyer he's just lying his pants off. I just don't believe anything this guy is saying. But at the same time, it adheres to some logic that makes sense. So do you think lawyers really believe what they're saying in a courtroom, or do you think they're simply defending their position?
I think sometimes it depends on the lawyer too, because the kind of the stereotype of like, an attorney that's kind of a sleazeball or, whatever. I think that, yeah, there might be times when an attorney like that does do stuff like that. But I think that if you have an attorney that is really, obviously you're advocating for your client. So, but you're not just personally, I wouldn't go in there and just make something up and lie. I would look into what is the best way that I can advocate for my client. Okay, if this is the way that I can do it, then I'm going to do it this way and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. Whereas some attorneys might not, even though that's what you should be doing, some attorneys might just, take on a case that they don't believe in at all and, and just kind of, yeah. Sometime last year I had gone to court with an attorney that I worked with, and it was probably, in the very beginning of me practicing, and this one attorney was, like what you said, they just lied. And so when we got back to the office, I was like, that attorney, just straight up lied. And the other attorney that I was working with was like, oh, Caitlin, you're so cute. Because it's like naive to think that attorneys go in there, just being the best attorney that they are, being honest people. And I think about that all the time with, people who lie on the stand, and it's like, but it's illegal to perjure, but people do it all the time. So, I don't know.
So do you think, is law similar to chess in that it just depends on who the better lawyer is in a case? Or do you think, no, the truth is supreme?
I would say, I was just about to say it depends. But I think, a good attorney does have a strong advantage, and they might win, even if they're, even if the law doesn't seem to be completely on their side. If you're able to make an awesome argument, then you might, and I think it also probably depends on what the law is. There might be a law where it's not a cut and dry answer, or there might be a law where it is. So even if you're a really good attorney and you're trying to argue a point that wouldn't apply at all, then you might not win. But if it's a gray area law and you're a really good attorney, then you're probably going to win.
I have just a couple more questions for you. I appreciate your time. I'm enjoying your responses. I have one more quote to tell you. It's by Honoré de Balzac. He was a playwright and I think a novelist. He says, "Laws are spider webs through which the big flies pass and the little ones get caught." Do you think so? To me, that means that the people with the big time lawyers, they can pass through the web no problem, but the small criminals who only have a public defender are going to be fried. Do you think that's how law works, actually? Do you think that the big fish get to fly and the small guys get fried?
Definitely. I think that, especially when it comes to criminal law, I know, even though I don't practice criminal law, I really enjoy, like true crime, shows and podcasts and things like that. And they're, where they're talking about stuff like that all the time, where it's, yeah, and all kinds of things play into that. But I don't think that, I think it's more likely that, yeah, if you have a private attorney, if you have a lot of money, if, race plays into that, I think, yeah. And I think it depends. This is kind of a random example, but I've recently been watching the Scientology docu-series that Leah Remini did. And in those cases, for example, in those, and some of those cases were civil suits against the Church of Scientology. And if you're just like an average person who, yeah, maybe you have some money to pay a lawyer versus the Church of Scientology who has billions of dollars to fight tooth and nail, So I think that's a good example of that, know?
Wow. Wow. Caitlin Rodriguez, I appreciate your time and your candidness. I just have one more question for you. You can answer it any way you like. And I'll ask that you pardon my French. Who the hell are you?
I'm just I don't even think of myself as being a lawyer. I'm just a woman who was born and raised in Ventura, and my goal in life is to help people.